In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, may peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah the Almighty be upon all of you. I am Umar bin Abid, and you're watching Umar Linguistics. So, dear viewers, today we are going to recap Chapter 1 Articulation and Acoustics. And as you know, we have started this book, A Course in Phonetics, to study phonetics in a bit detail and comprehensive manner. So this video is in English, so throughout this video I'll speak in English, and if you want to watch the same video in Urdu or Hindi as well, so I have added the link in the description below, so you can watch this video in Urdu as well. So actually in this lecture we are going to summarize briefly all these lectures which we have discussed earlier, and I shall add the link as well of the complete playlist as well, so you can watch any lecture you want. So in lecture 1 we discussed the speech production, where we discussed that how we produce speech. We discussed that tongue and lips are most important parts in speech production, and how we exhale speech, and that most of our speech is exhale speech, in which we push our air from lungs throughout the mouth. We also discussed that how speech is voiceless and voiced by the movement of vocal folds. If they are vibrating, so the sounds are voiced, and if they are not vibrating, the sounds are voiceless. We also discussed the vocal tract anatomy, the different parts of the vocal tract, and we named some major parts used in speech production. And we also looked at these tongue positions in a phrase on the top of his neck. Then we discussed that how the nasal tract and oral tract is divided, and when the velum is raised against the wall of the pharynx, so at that time the speech produced is called oral, or the speech production is oral. And when the velum is not raised against the wall of the pharynx, so at that time the sounds are called nasals. And lastly, in first lecture we discussed the four main components of speech mechanism, which were oronasal process, articulatory process, phonation process, and airstreams process. That how the air comes from lung and reach to at the vocal folds, and here it has the phonation, and then we articulate it either through our mouth, or sometimes the air is pushed out through the nose when the sounds are nasal. In second lecture we discussed about the sound waves and how sound waves travel in the air, so we discussed somewhat about acoustics. And in the incoming lectures we also described and classify consonants and their 5 aspects. I have separately made I have separately made a video as well about the 5 ways to describe the consonant, where we look at the place of articulation, manner of articulation, voicing, nasality, and laterality. So actually this was what we discussed in the second lecture, the sound wave, and how the vocal folds vibrating, how much they are vibrating, and then this complete cycle, which means that at each second, at each 100 parts of each second, vocal folds complete a cycle and complete this wave. Then we also discuss the spectrogram and how to read it. Then in lecture 3 we discuss the places of articulatory gesture, or in other words places of articulation. In lecture 4 we discuss the oronasal process and the manners of articulation. So for example, in places of articulation gesture we have alveolar ridge, and like we have velum, and then we have dental, and something like that. Similarly, we have velum is also called soft palate. Then in oronasal process of manner of articulation, we have some like bilabial sounds, then labiodental sounds, and we also describe them in what are oral sounds when the articulation or the air pushes out through the mouth, and nasal sounds when the air is coming not through the mouth but through the nose. Then in lecture 5 we discuss the acoustic of consonants, how consonants can be described acoustically. So, like acoustic properties of consonants in waveforms and in spectrograms. We also look at what is amplitude, periodicity, and frequency, and such aspects. So, like this, we discuss these places of articulation: lip, teeth, hard palate, soft palate, alveolar ridge, uvula, pharynx. We also discuss the different parts of the tongue, like tip, blade, front, center, back, root, epiglottis, and root of the tongue. We also discussed some major places of articulation, that if the sounds if in the production of sound we use our lips only, then it is called labial articulation, and if we use the tip or blade of the tongue, then these are called coronal articulations, and if we use the back of the tongue, then we call them dorsal articulations. Then in manner of articulation we discussed that how the bilabial sound is produced, or how the nasal sound is produced, how the oral, or what is the difference between, like this is an oral and nasal sound because the velum is not raised against the back wall of the pharynx, and this is an oral sound because velum is raised against the back wall of the pharynx. So such type of differences also we discussed in the manners of articulation. Then this was what we discussed in the acoustics of consonants, where we look at that how vowels are different from the consonants, and that we can better describe sound with the help of the spectrogram rather than with the sound wave form. In lecture 6 we discussed vowels. We actually classify vowels and describe them with their three main parameters, like front, back, high, low, and rounding. And it was actually the very comprehensive lecture at how we can identify the height of the tongue, like E, which is a front high vowel, and U, which is actually a back high vowel, and how we can differentiate them. And I showed many videos to understand this concept, to make you understand this concept. Then in lecture 7 we discuss acoustic properties of vowels, where we look at some form and frequencies, that such some pitches of vowels have more frequencies as compared to other, and somehow the high vowels have highest first frequency, but the lower vowels have highest second pitch, and uh, the back vowels have higher second pitch, while the uh, front vowels have the higher first pitch. Then in lecture 8, which was actually the last lecture, where we discuss suprasegmentals, and we discuss how stress can change the meaning, how pitch and intonation can play a role in changing the meaning, and how we can perceive the pitch, what is pitch actually, what is loudness, and something like that. So these were actually 8 lectures in which we discussed some basic concepts, and many concepts which we have discussed in the first chapter, we shall discuss them detail in other chapters as well, as I have already described in those lectures. So I'll try to make a video on exercises as well, which has been given at the end of each chapter. So I hope you have understood it, and to watch all these lectures comprehensively, I provided the link in the description below, so you can watch from there. So don't forget to give your feedback. Remember in your prayers. Jazakallah khairan, and thank you.